take a break from talking about esoteric matters that are coded and would not have me killed, and AI and the fake disclosure script, I would like to focus on the material that I originally wanted to make a little page about, which would be meditations and advice on how to see yourself and everything else. And then the emergencies started happening. The disclosure scripts, the AI stuff, and I switched gears, and I unfortunately had to get dark and serious and deal with basically serious subject matter. But I'm going to switch gears here and go back to the type of things that I originally wanted to talk about before the problem of evil became so bad that it's an emergency state. And what I want to talk about has to do with, I believe, Rupert Sheldrake's studies, morphogenic fields. And I feel that people that believe, for example, like I do, in spirit particles, where you can release ether, okay, spirit ether, either positive or negative. Imagine a particle spinning, and inside of it, there's spiritual particles, right? And, whoops. I'm always getting into traffic situations here. But, morphogenic fields can also be applied to spiritual thinking, to think about spiritual memory and how... for example, how in a certain experiment where a rat, I forget exactly who, I'd have to look this up, but I know it was a real experiment, where it was like a Skinner type of experiment where rats were being shocked when they would go for a cherry flavored something, right? And it happened on a regular basis to the point where the mother who was engaged in this experiment gave birth, and the first litter she gave birth to produced babies that had a deterrence, a dislike to cherry flavor. Okay, I mean, they were avoiding the cherry flavor, and which contributes to the idea of morphogenic fields bypassing the traditional hereditary. A lot of times people like to use the term biohacking. This would be a version of that, where you can change the genetics yourself. And this would be an animal experiment in relation to biohacking before birth. So this would have been a stimulus that gave the rat an extremely negative experience via electric shock, to the point where right away when it produced babies, the babies were basically afraid of the cherry, not for shock reasons, just because cherry had been embedded in the morphogenic field, well, you go ahead and use that term, of the mother, passed along to the babies. Now, the point of this talk is to talk about squirrels. I often will post squirrel clips because I've become so fond of animals. I always have, but ever since my mystery student, now mystery teacher engagement, animals, my appreciation for animals that I never really recognized has grown substantially. And I'm not a cat guy or a squirrel guy. I have 2 cats and 2 fish, that's it. And I will feed the outdoor animals like birds and squirrels and chipmunks. And there was 2 or 3 squirrels in the summer that kept showing up, and then 2 made it all the way through the winter, to the point where I actually named one. I noticed one was pregnant, and I named her Chenaults. And I put up a squirrel box, and I noticed that she had babies. 1 minute she was thick, next minute she was thin. And it was all timed out during nesting season, and now it's been about 14, 15 weeks, and I see these babies pop out. I thought it was one originally that had survived. Looks like there's two that had survived. And 3 squirrels had been hit by a car a couple weeks ago. And so what I think is happening here is the survivors were these 2 squirrels, but it's more than just survival. I noticed the first time I saw this little guy, he was on top of the box. He was kind of looking at the window where I have a feeder. And then he came to the feeder and immediately started showing interest in me. Like he had already known who I was. I've been feeding these squirrels now for a year. None of them have behaved like this. And it was this baby who was displaying traits that acted just like the mother. And the mother is a survival. I mean, she's a survivor, man. Like these squirrels, most of them don't even stay. They just move on. But the smart ones, apparently, or in her case, needed to nest. And she's still around. You know, these are the ones that don't get taken out by raccoons or eagles, hawks. You know, there's hawks in Ohio that like to pick up a small dog and then fly away with it and drop it from like 100 feet or something like that, then go take the cadaver. You know, they do that. You got to watch out. So this little baby squirrel is acting like it just knows exactly who I am, and not only knows that I'm safe, but exactly where the food's at. And this is the first time I've seen this thing up close. It's like we were old friends reconnecting or something. And then every time I've seen it since, it's like trying to get inside. And you can't get too attached to these things because, you know, they could get killed at any minute when they're that age. I mean, after they're a couple years old, yeah, there's a good chance they're going to continue to be a survivor. But so this is something that I'm thinking about emailing Rupert Sheldrake about. You know, he's a guy who, unfortunately, when I was having my supernatural experiences, he was one of the first people I reached out to when I was almost in a delirious state. I was in pre-initiation, and I sort of embarrassed myself. And so he went from talking to me to giving me yes/no answers. But, you know, it was a learning process. But I'm going to try emailing him again over this. I think this is something that is related to some sort of morphogenic field attached to this memory. I mean, how else could this squirrel, you know, just come up to the window as if he's done it a million times and as if he knows exactly who I am? Is there a connection? Is there not? I don't know. You know, you start to tune in with animals on a whole other level once you're turned on and you've either partially or fully unwound your spirit organ, the proboscis. You know, this is the antenna that I've talked about many times that you see in all the ancient staffers, sculptures, whether it's a tuning fork on the head, an orb, headdress, elaborate headdress, or simply a proboscis emitting from some sort of staffature found in a primordial mound or something. You know, it's all the same thing. It's about the people who want to do good, waking up, unwinding their spirit organ, and living in a new form of consciousness, which is available right now. And having a greater appreciation for animals is a big step and a beautiful step to where you can go. And another book that I came across that I ended up having to read, and I actually reviewed this book professionally about 5 years ago, right when I was getting back into meditation, because I had an original awakening through Ram Dass meditations like 15 years ago. Then I got caught back up with pessimism and the problem of evil due to taking 5 years of philosophy, where you almost have to be an atheist to actually do academic philosophy. I read a book called Rewild Yourself. Very simple book I highly recommend, about appreciating nature. A beautiful, fun book for all ages. Rewild Yourself. I'll have to take a picture of that book. Great author,